She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her time wasn't over yet. Maybe she hadn't missed her chance, she didn't know how. But something inside her told her that life was about to change. The piano remained silent most nights, collecting dust while she dreamed quietly. But fate has its own rhythm, and destiny doesn't care about timing or titles. It only waits for the right moment to play its tune. And for Emily Ross, that moment was coming soon, hidden inside an ordinary evening that would turn into the most extraordinary night of her life. The night began like any other, but something in the air felt different. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, and the sound of soft rain tapped against the restaurant windows. The city lights blurred in the wet glass, making the whole place glow like a dream. Inside, the restaurant was packed, every table full, voices blending with the sound of forks and laughter. The atmosphere was bright and alive, but behind the smiles and music, chaos was quietly brewing. Emily was moving quickly between tables, balancing a tray of drinks with the grace of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Her mind was focused on orders, table numbers, and remembering who wanted sparkling water and who didn't. It was just another busy evening, until she noticed the piano. The empty chair beside it looked strange. Usually the pianist would be there by now. Warming up before the main dinner rush, she turned toward her friend Sarah and whispered, "Isn't Daniel supposed to be playing tonight?" Sarah shrugged. "Yeah, but I heard he called in sick last minute." Emily's heart skipped. She glanced again at the piano and untouched, waiting. The room missing the soft rhythm that usually filled the air. A few guests were already asking questions. One elegant woman waved her hand and said, "Why isn't the music playing?" "It feels dull without it." The manager, Mr. Clark, was pacing near the bar, his phone in his hand, his forehead lined with stress. "I've called 3 replacements," he muttered. "No one's available this late." Emily hesitated for a moment. Her chest felt tight. She knew this was not her place. She was just a waitress, not an entertainer still. The silence around the piano felt wrong. She could almost hear melodies in her head, songs that could fix the mood, calm the guests and bring the magic back. Her fingers itched, wanting to touch those keys again. She stood there, frozen between fear and longing, until the manager's voice broke her thoughts. "This night's going to be a disaster," he said under his breath. Emily felt something inside her push forward, like a quiet voice whispering now or never. Before she could stop herself, she said softly, "Mr. Clark, I can play the piano." The manager looked at her, blinking in disbelief. "You?" he asked, half laughing. "You can play?" Emily nodded nervously. "A little. I studied music before I started working here." For a moment he said nothing, just stared at her. Then another complaint came from a nearby table, and he sighed. "Fine, go ahead, but if it doesn't sound good, I'll have to stop you, understood?" Emily nodded again, her hands trembling. Her heart was racing so fast she thought everyone could hear it. She walked toward the piano, every step feeling heavier than the last. The restaurant lights seemed to dim, or maybe it was just her focus narrowing. The world around her faded, the chatter, the footsteps, the clinking glasses. All of it melted away until it was just her and the piano. She sat down slowly, brushing her fingers lightly across the keys. They were smooth and cold, like they were waiting for her. A few guests turned their heads, whispering to each other. One of the chefs peeked out from the kitchen. Curious, Emily took a deep breath and closed her eyes. The first note came out soft, uncertain, but then another followed, and another, and soon a melody began to bloom, gentle and fragile at first, then growing stronger with every touch. The sound filled the restaurant, wrapping around every corner, floating through conversations and melting into hearts. The guests began to quiet down. Forks rested on plates, voices faded, and even the rain outside seemed to listen. Emily's fingers moved gracefully, the music flowing from somewhere deep inside her. She wasn't reading notes or thinking about technique. She was just feeling. Every emotion she had ever buried came out through the piano. Her pain, her hope, her lost dreams. All turning into sound. Sarah stood frozen by the counter, her mouth slightly open. The manager stopped pacing and turned toward the piano, his eyes wide. Even the elite guests who usually barely noticed the staff were leaning forward. Mesmerized, one whispered, "Who is she?" Another said, "I didn't know the restaurant hired someone like that." As Emily played, she forgot about everything, her job, her worries, her limits. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore, it was her voice, her second heartbeat. The song rose and fell like waves, carrying everyone in the room with it. When the final note hung in the air, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then, as if waking from a spell, the crowd erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping, cheering, shouting, "Bravo!" The sound of their voices filled the restaurant like thunder. Emily sat there in shock. Her hands still resting on the keys, her chest was tight. Her eyes filled with tears. She had no words. She had simply followed her heart, and now the world was listening. The manager approached slowly, still clapping. "Emily, I had no idea," he said quietly. "That was incredible." She gave a small, shy smile, her cheeks flushed. The guests kept clapping, calling for more, and among them, sitting near the bar, a man in a gray suit watched her carefully. He wasn't clapping or speaking, just watching with quiet intensity. He leaned toward the waiter beside him and asked, "Do you know her name?" That man would change Emily's life forever, but at that moment she didn't know who he was. She only knew that, for the first time in a long while, she had played her truth and the world had listened. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Emily sat at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly above the keys. The light from the chandeliers shimmered over her hands, making them look almost golden. Around her, the quiet stretched like a soft blanket. The guests were whispering, unsure of what was about to happen. No one expected music from a waitress in a black apron. Yet all eyes were now on her. Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. She could hear her heartbeat, fast and loud, echoing in her ears. Her palms were damp, her throat dry. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. What if I make a mistake? What if they laugh? What if I forget how to play? But beneath those fears was something stronger, a tiny voice whispering, "This is your moment." She pressed the first key, a single, soft note that floated through the air like a feather. It was followed by another, then another, and slowly, a melody began to form, gentle at first, then fuller, richer, more alive. The sound was pure, sincere. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every note carried a piece of her heart. The noise in the restaurant faded. Conversation stopped. Forks froze midair. And the waiters stood still. Even the kitchen fell silent. The only sound left was Emily's music, spreading like ripples in water. It filled the room, wrapping around the people sitting there, reaching even the farthest corners. Her fingers moved with a grace she hadn't felt in years. It was as if they remembered every song she had ever played, every lesson she had ever learned. The rhythm flowed effortlessly. The melody told a story, her story. The years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the lost dreams when all turned into sound. It was raw and beautiful. The guests looked at her, mesmerized, their faces softened, eyes glistening. A woman near the window clasped her hands together. A man at the bar whispered, "She's incredible." No one could look away. They weren't just listening to music, and they were feeling it. Deeply, Emily closed her eyes and let her emotions guide her. She no longer saw the elegant tables or the expensive suits. She saw her old music school, her grandmother's smiling face, her small bedroom with a worn-out keyboard, and the little girl she once was, sitting in front of the piano, dreaming of moments like this. The music grew stronger, bolder, like it had finally found its wings. Each note shimmered with emotion, rising and falling like waves against the shore. When she hit a high note, the sound soared, echoing through the restaurant, making people's hearts tighten. Then she slowed, her hands moving delicately, letting the melody breathe. It was like she was telling the audience, "This is what it feels like to be alive." Sarah stood near the counter, completely still, tears in her eyes. She had worked beside Emily for months, but had never seen this side of her friend. The manager, Mr. Clark, stood speechless, his phone forgotten in his hand. Even he couldn't hide the awe on his face at one of the front tables. A child leaned against her mother and whispered, "She plays like an angel." Her mother nodded. Unable to speak, around the room something had shifted. The elite guests who had come only for fine dining were now part of something far more meaningful. As Emily continued to play, her confidence grew. She could feel the energy in the room changing. It was no longer just a restaurant, it was a stage. A dream come alive, her body swayed gently with the rhythm, her eyes closed, her soul wide open. The music built to a powerful crescendo. Her fingers moved faster, her expression intense. Every chord struck deep emotion, filling hearts with warmth and wonder. And then slowly, gracefully, she let the song fade. It was another busy evening in the heart of the city. The kind of night when the restaurant lights glowed like golden stars through the big glass windows. Inside, people dressed in fine clothes sat at shiny tables covered with white cloth. Soft music played in the background, mixing with the sound of clinking glasses and gentle laughter. The air smelled of roasted garlic, butter and fresh herbs. Everything felt elegant and calm. Among the waiters moving quickly from table to table was a young woman named Emily Ross. She wore a black uniform, neat and simple, and carried a small notebook in her pocket to take orders. Her hair was tied in a bun, and a few loose strands framed her face. She looked like any other waitress, smiling politely, keeping her balance while carrying heavy trays filled with plates and glasses. But there was something different about her eyes. They held a quiet dream, a small spark that even tiredness couldn't hide. Emily had been working at this restaurant for almost 2 years. Every night she watched people laugh, celebrate birthdays, make business deals, and take pictures with their fancy meals. She moved through the crowd gracefully, her steps soft and silent on the polished floor. The customers liked her gentle smile and the way she always remembered their favorite dishes. She had learned how to appear calm even when things were busy, though inside her heart often felt far away. At the far corner of the restaurant stood a large black piano. Its surface shone under the warm yellow light. Every time Emily passed by it, her eyes would drift toward the keys. She loved that piano more than anyone knew. Sometimes when the restaurant was empty and she was cleaning up, she would quietly touch one of the keys, just one note, and then quickly pull her hand back, afraid someone might hear. Years ago, Emily had dreamed of becoming a pianist. She used to practice for hours at a small music school in her town. Her fingers had learned to dance across the keys, creating melodies that made her heart soar. But life had other plans. Her father lost his job, and her mother got sick. Bills piled up, and Emily had to leave school to help support her family. She found this job at the restaurant, promising herself it would be only for a short while. But time passed, and her dream began to feel like a story she had once told herself. That evening, as she served wine to a table of laughing guests, she heard someone say, "I hope the pianist plays tonight." Emily smiled politely, but inside her heart ached. The restaurant used to have a live pianist every weekend, but lately, the new manager had cut back on music to save money. The piano now sat silent most nights, like a sleeping giant in the corner. The clock on the wall showed 7:30. The dinner rush was at its peak. The kitchen doors swung open and closed as chefs called out orders. Steam rose from the pots and waiters hurried by with plates of steak, pasta, and desserts. Emily kept moving, her smile never fading even when her feet began to ache. As she passed the piano again, she paused for a split second. The smooth black and white keys seemed to whisper to her, reminding her of something she had lost. She imagined sitting down, playing a soft melody that would fill the room with peace. The thought made her chest tighten. She quickly shook her head and kept walking. She was just a waitress now, and the piano belonged to someone else near the entrance. A couple walked in, elegant, confident, the kind of people who belonged to the city's elite circle. They were greeted warmly and led to a reserved table near the piano. Emily noticed them but didn't think much. They were like many others who came here for luxury and good music. Though tonight there was no music at all, the restaurant glowed brighter as more guests arrived. Conversations grew louder, laughter spread, and the sound of forks against plates filled the air to everyone around. It was just another fine evening, but for Emily, something about that night felt different. There was a strange energy, like a quiet storm waiting behind the calm. She didn't know why, but her heart felt restless. During a short break, she stood near the counter sipping water. Her friend Sarah, another waitress, laughed and said, "You look like you're miles away." Thinking about something, Emily smiled. "Just tired, I guess," she replied. Though her eyes drifted once again toward the piano, Sarah followed her gaze and said teasingly, "One day, you'll play that thing and shock everyone." Emily laughed softly. "In my dreams, maybe," she said, but her voice carried a small tremor of truth. Outside, the city lights twinkled, and cars moved like streams of color inside. Emily took a deep breath and returned to work. She didn't know that before the night was over, everything would change. The same piano she'd admired from a distance would become the center of her story. The same people who barely noticed her now would be left in awe. But for now, she was just the quiet waitress with a secret passion, serving tables in a restaurant where dreams seemed far away. The music inside her heart was silent, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. and that moment was coming sooner than she could ever imagine. When the restaurant finally grew quiet after the dinner rush, Emily moved through the tables, wiping away crumbs and collecting empty glasses. The sound of laughter had faded, replaced by the gentle hum of the air conditioner and the clatter of dishes being washed in the back. It was the time of night when everyone began to relax, but Emily's thoughts were far from calm. She glanced once more toward the piano in the corner. Its black surface reflected the soft glow of the hanging lights. Like a pool of calm water in the middle of chaos, no one was paying attention to it but to Emily. It was the most beautiful thing in the room. Every night she passed it, her heart gave a small tug, like it was calling her name. Emily had always been different, even as a child. While other kids ran around playing outside, she loved sitting beside the old upright piano in her grandmother's house. Her grandmother had taught her the basics. Guiding her small fingers across the keys, she used to say, "Music listens to you as much as you listen to it." Those words stayed with Emily, like a gentle melody that never faded. When she was 15, Emily won a local music contest. Her performance had brought tears to people's eyes. The small crowd had stood and clapped, her grandmother beaming with pride that night. Emily promised herself she would make music her life, but dreams are fragile things, easily broken when reality hits hard. A few years later, her father's job at the factory was gone. Her mother fell sick, and bills piled higher than her music sheets. Emily tried to keep playing, but her lessons became fewer, and her practice time shorter. Eventually, she had to sell her old keyboard to help pay rent. That day she sat on her bed, staring at the empty space where it used to stand, and whispered to herself, "One day, I'll play again." But one day never seemed to come now. Every shift at the restaurant felt like a quiet reminder of what she had lost. Still, she found small ways to stay connected to her dream. She downloaded piano apps on her phone, tapping invisible keys during her breaks. Sometimes she even stayed late after closing, sitting near the piano, her hands hovering above the keys but never daring to press them. It was almost like she was afraid of waking up something she couldn't control. The restaurant staff had noticed her habit of lingering near the piano. They would joke and say, "Emily, you love that thing more than your tips," and she would laugh it off, pretending it meant nothing. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't just love, it was longing, pure and painful. One night, when everyone had gone home, Emily stayed behind to help the cleaner. The lights were dim, and the restaurant felt strangely peaceful. The piano stood in its usual place, quiet and waiting. She looked around, no one was there. Her heart started beating faster. She took a slow step toward it, then another, until finally she stood before it. Her hands trembled as she reached out. The keys were cold under her fingers. She pressed one softly, and the sound that came out was like a whisper, small, gentle yet powerful enough to make her eyes water. She played another note, then another, and before she realized it, her hands were gliding across the keyboard. The melody that flowed out was something she hadn't planned. It came from memory, from the corners of her heart where music still lived. The sound filled the empty restaurant, echoing softly against the walls. It was as if the piano had been waiting for her all this time. The moment felt unreal, like time had stopped just for her. When she finally lifted her fingers, the last note lingered in the air before fading. She stood there silent, her chest rising and falling for a moment. She felt like her old self again, the girl who dreamed of playing for the world. But as soon as reality returned, she quickly wiped her tears and packed her things. Her shift was over, and she had to be up early the next morning. Walking home through the quiet streets, she couldn't stop smiling. The feeling of the keys still danced in her fingertips. It was a small moment, but it lit a spark in her heart again. She didn't know it yet, but that tiny spark would soon become a fire that no one could ignore. Over the next few weeks, she found herself thinking more about music. Whenever she cleaned a table near the piano, she imagined playing in front of the guests. Sometimes, she even hummed tunes under her breath while serving. A few customers noticed and smiled. One even said, "You should be the one on that piano, not just serving food." Emily laughed nervously, pretending it was just a joke, but inside the words echoed deeply, her hands hovering over the final note before pressing it softly. The sound lingered, long and delicate. Before disappearing into silence, no one moved. It was as if the whole world had forgotten how to breathe. Then a single clap broke the silence, followed by another and another, until suddenly, the entire restaurant erupted into applause. The sound was thunderous. Rolling like a wave of admiration and disbelief, Emily lifted her head, startled. She hadn't expected this. Her cheeks flushed pink, her eyes wide with emotion. People were standing, clapping, cheering, some even whistled, others shouted, "Encore! Play another one!" The same elite guests who once barely glanced at her now looked at her as if she were a star. Tears blurred her vision. She gave a small, shy smile and stood slowly from the piano bench. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming feeling of being seen, truly seen for the first time in years. The manager walked up to her, his voice soft, almost shaking. "Emily, that was extraordinary," he said. "I had no idea you could play like that." She smiled faintly, her voice barely a whisper. "Neither did I." The applause continued, echoing through the restaurant. People took out their phones, recording her. Wanting to capture the moment, Emily looked around, her heart swelling. She realized something. The music she thought she had lost had never really left her. It had just been waiting for the right moment to return. As she stood beside the piano, the lights reflecting off her tearful eyes, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. For years she had served others silently, but tonight, for the first time, the world had listened to her voice. What she didn't know was that someone in the audience, a man sitting near the bar, quietly observing, was about to change everything. He had seen many performers in his life, but none quite like her. To him, this wasn't just a song. It was the beginning of a story the world needed to hear. And as Emily smiled through her tears, that man reached for his phone, ready to take the first step that would lead her toward a destiny she never imagined. The moment Emily's last note faded into silence, the air inside the restaurant seemed to shimmer. For a few seconds, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire room had forgotten where it was. The music had lifted everyone into another world, and now as they returned, they couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. Then the applause began again, louder this time, deeper, rolling across the restaurant like thunder. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering, some even whistled. The sound echoed off the marble floors and glass walls, filling every corner of the elegant room. Emily sat frozen at the piano, her heart pounding, her hands still trembling slightly from the rush of emotion. She looked up and saw faces she had seen 100 times before, people she had served meals to, refilled drinks for, smiled at politely, but tonight, those same faces were different. They were looking at her with awe, respect, admiration. The once distant, proud crowd had softened. They were no longer guests, and she was no longer just a waitress in that moment. Everyone in the room was connected by something invisible yet powerful. Music. The restaurant that had always felt cold and formal now felt warm, alive. The golden light seemed brighter, the air lighter. People leaned closer to one another, whispering about the unexpected performance. Couples smiled, old friends laughed, and even the staff felt a strange happiness bubbling inside them. It was as if Emily's music had melted the walls between them all. Mr. Clark, the manager, stood near the bar, his arms crossed, trying to hide the emotion on his face. He had worked in the restaurant business for years, seen hundreds of live performers come and go. But this, he thought, was different. "She's got something special," he whispered to himself. Sarah, standing beside him, wiped a tear from her eye. "I told you she was meant for more than this," she said softly. Her smile was proud, full of joy for her friend. At one of the corner tables, an older gentleman leaned toward his wife and said, "That girl's got soul, not just skill." His wife nodded, still moved by the melody. "It felt like she was playing from her heart," she whispered. Emily slowly rose from the piano bench, her eyes still glassy. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. The applause was still going strong. People were calling her name. "Play again." Someone shouted, "Encore!" Another voice joined. Her heart swelled. She couldn't believe it. For years she had hidden her gift, afraid it didn't matter anymore, and now, it was the very thing that had changed everything. She gave a small nod and sat back down. The room fell silent again. All eyes on her, waiting, hoping, expecting. This time, she didn't hesitate. She took a breath, placed her hands gently on the keys, and began to play once more. The second song was softer, slower, more emotional. It wasn't about showing skill. It was about connection. The notes were tender, almost like a conversation between her and the audience. Every sound seemed to carry warmth, peace and light. People closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Some smiled, others wiped away tears in the back of the room. The chefs had stopped cooking just to listen. Even the security guard by the door leaned in, his usually stern face softened by the beauty of the moment. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement like tiny stars, and for anyone walking by, the soft piano sound drifting through the restaurant window would have felt like magic. As the final note of her second piece hung in the air, the crowd rose again, cheering, clapping, shouting her name. The energy was electric. People were smiling at each other, strangers sharing looks of wonder. It was rare, so rare, to witness something so pure. So unexpected, the elite guests, the ones who usually kept their distance, were now part of the moment too. They clapped the loudest, their expressions filled with admiration and disbelief. One man in an expensive suit even walked up to the piano, placed a hand on the lid and said, "You have a gift, young lady. Don't ever stop." Emily smiled shyly, her cheeks glowing pink. She whispered, "Thank you," her voice trembling with emotion. The restaurant had completely transformed. It no longer felt like a place for luxury. It felt like a place for life, for passion, for dreams. The waiters were smiling as they served dessert. The guests were laughing, and Emily was glowing. Mr. Clark approached her again, still shaking his head in disbelief. "You've just given this restaurant something money can't buy," he said with a half smile. "Heart," she laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just played," she said humbly. But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. She had shared her soul, and it had touched others. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like a background worker in someone else's story. She felt alive, seen and free, and somewhere near the bar, the man in the gray suit still watched quietly. He didn't join the applause this time. He simply smiled, the kind of smile that knows when destiny has just revealed itself. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notebook and wrote something down, a name perhaps, a time, a plan. Because what he saw tonight wasn't just a waitress who could play the piano. He saw an artist, a story, a miracle in disguise. And as the crowd continued to cheer, and Emily bowed her head in gratitude, none of them realized that this night, this one beautiful, unexpected night, had already begun to rewrite her future. The room had been transformed. Yes, but so had Emily. And no one, not even she, would ever be the same again. The applause still echoed like waves long after Emily's fingers left the piano keys. The sound bounced off the glass walls and crystal chandeliers, rolling through the restaurant like thunder mixed with wonder. For a few heartbeats, no one wanted the moment to end. The people who once sat stiffly behind perfect manners now clapped like children at a fireworks show. Among the crowd were some of the city's most elegant and powerful figures. Businessmen, socialites, artists, and critics, people who thought they had seen and heard everything worth admiring. They were used to fine dining, expensive wines, and performances booked months in advance. But tonight a simple waitress had undone them all. At the corner table near the piano, Mrs. Lillian Havers, a woman known for her sharp tongue and endless pearls, sat completely still. Her husband, Mr. Havers, who rarely showed emotion, leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "Good heavens," he whispered. "She plays like she's been waiting her whole life for that song." Mrs. Havers nodded slowly. "She's not performing," she said softly. "She's feeling." At another table, a group of young professionals, loud and confident moments ago, now sat in silence, their faces thoughtful. One of them, a lawyer named James, finally said, "You know, I've heard world-class pianists, but none of them made me feel like that." His friend laughed gently. "Maybe that's because they play to impress," he said. "She plays to remember." Emily stood by the piano, smiling nervously, her hands folded in front of her apron. She didn't know where to look. The cheers were still strong. People clapping, standing, smiling. Some even took photos, others whispered to each other, pointing and nodding. For years, she had blended into the background, invisible in a sea of fine clothes and loud conversations. But tonight she was the light everyone turned toward. Mr. Clark, the manager, walked up to her, pride shining in his eyes. "Emily, you've just stunned half the city," he said with a laugh. "You've done something no marketing campaign could ever do." She giggled softly. Still overwhelmed, "I just wanted to help," she replied. Her voice was small, but her eyes glowed with something fierce and something alive. From the bar, the man in the gray suit watched everything unfold with calm, careful attention. He was different from the rest, quiet, observant, his face unreadable. He sipped his drink slowly, his gaze fixed on Emily as if studying her every move. When the applause faded, he leaned toward the bartender and asked, "Does she work here every night?" The bartender nodded. "Yeah, Emily Ross, been here a couple of years, why?" The man smiled faintly. "Just curious," he said. But his eyes told a deeper story. Meanwhile, the elite guests began to approach Emily, something that had never happened before. They complimented her, shook her hand, asked if she had studied at a conservatory. She blushed, answering humbly, "I used to take lessons when I was younger." One woman said, "My dear, you mustn't waste talent like this. You belong on a stage," another added. "You could fill concert halls with that kind of emotion." Emily thanked them politely, though her heart raced with disbelief across the room. Sarah watched her friend with tears in her eyes. "Look at her," she whispered to another waiter. "She was meant for this." The waiter smiled. "Yeah. It's like watching someone step into their true self." The energy in the restaurant had completely changed. Gone was the stiff, cold elegance. In its place was warmth, laughter, and life. Strangers were talking to each other, complimenting the performance, sharing how it made them feel. For once, everyone in that room, rich or poor, staff or guest, was connected by the same emotion. Emily felt like she was floating. Her heart was light, her mind spinning with disbelief. She had never imagined this, never expected applause, admiration, or attention. She only wanted to help fill the silence when the pianist didn't show up. And yet here she was, standing under the golden lights, her name whispered by people who would never have noticed her before. Then from across the room, a new sound cut through the chatter. A single, steady clap, slow and deliberate. The crowd turned their heads. It was the man in the gray suit, still seated, still calm. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with quiet intensity. He stood up, buttoned his coat, and walked toward her. The crowd parted slightly as he approached. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "That," he said, his voice deep and warm, "was one of the most moving performances I've ever heard." Emily blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "I was just—" He shook his head gently. "No," he interrupted. "You weren't just playing. You were living every note." Mr. Clark stepped forward, curious. "And you are?" he asked. The man smiled. "Thomas Grant," he said. "Music producer." The room seemed to pause for a second. People whispered his name, recognizing it instantly. He was well known in the city's music industry, the kind of man who discovered raw talent and turned it into gold. Emily's eyes widened, her heart pounding so fast she thought she might faint. "A producer?" she said quietly. Thomas nodded. "Yes, and I'd like to talk to you." "Emily Ross," he said, his tone kind but serious. "You have something very rare, honesty in your music. You don't play to show off, you play to connect. And that's what the world needs." The crowd watched in silence. The same people who once looked down on her now looking at her as if witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. Emily's eyes shimmered with tears she could no longer hide. She felt like she was standing in a dream, one she never dared to dream again. Thomas handed her his business card. "Come by my studio tomorrow," he said. "Let's see what we can create together." And with that, he gave her a small nod and turned to leave. The crowd buzzed with excitement, voices rising again. People whispered, "Did he just offer her a deal? She's going to be famous, imagine." From waitress to star. Emily stood there, clutching the card in her shaking hands. The piano behind her gleamed in the soft light. Her heart felt too full for words. All she could do was smile, a smile that held gratitude, disbelief, and hope all at once. That night she didn't just play music. She changed how people saw her, and maybe even how she saw herself. The elite crowd that once ignored her had been silenced, not by wealth, not by status, but by truth. And as the last guests left the restaurant, their hearts still echoing with her music, Emily knew deep down that her life had just turned a corner she could never turn back from. The restaurant had finally emptied. The lights were dimmed, the laughter and chatter long gone. Only the soft hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Emily stood near the piano, still holding the small white business card in her trembling hand, her name printed neatly in black letters beside the name Thomas Grant. Her heart raced every time she looked at it. Sarah approached quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Here," she said, handing one to Emily. "You look like you could use this," Emily smiled faintly. "Thanks," she whispered. Her voice still carried the tremble of disbelief. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, the glow from the last chandelier shining faintly on the piano. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "You do realize what just happened, right?" she said. "That man, Thomas Grant, he's the Thomas Grant. The one who discovered Lily Marks. The pop singer who went international last year?" Emily blinked, her stomach flipping. "I've heard her songs on the radio," she murmured. "You mean he made her famous?" Sarah nodded. "Exactly, and now he wants to meet you." Emily looked back at the piano, her thoughts swirling. "I don't even know what to say if I go," she whispered. "I haven't played seriously in years. What if he changes his mind? What if I'm not good enough?" Sarah laughed softly. "Emily, did you hear yourself play tonight? You made grown men cry. You're more than good enough." Emily smiled shyly, though doubt still tugged at her heart. She'd spent so many years believing she had lost her chance that it was hard to imagine a door opening again. But that card in her hand, it was proof that maybe fate had been listening all along, waiting for her courage to return. She walked back to the piano and touched the keys gently. The surface was cool beneath her fingers. "This piano changed everything," she said softly. Sarah grinned. "No," she replied. "You did." When Emily finally left the restaurant that night, the streets were quiet. The rain had stopped hours ago, and the wet pavement shimmered under the streetlights. She walked slowly, replaying everything in her head. The music, the applause, the faces, and that final moment when Thomas Grant handed her his card. She clutched it tightly in her hand, as if it might disappear if she let go. At home, her small apartment felt different, warmer somehow. She set the card carefully on the table and sat beside it. Staring for a long time, the thought of tomorrow both thrilled and terrified her. She had no fancy clothes, no professional portfolio, no plan, only her heart and her music. That night she barely slept every time she closed her eyes. She saw the piano, heard the applause, and felt that spark again. The same one she used to feel as a girl when she believed the world was full of possibility. The next morning, sunlight poured through the thin curtains. Painting her room in gold, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair nervously. Her hands shook as she tied them back. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "You've been waiting your whole life for this." She put on her simplest dress, polished her old shoes, and took a deep breath before leaving her apartment. The city buzzed with life, cars honking, people hurrying. But Emily walked with quiet determination, clutching the address Thomas had given her. When she arrived at the studio, it looked nothing like she imagined. It wasn't flashy or grand. Just a simple building with large windows and the faint sound of instruments coming from inside. She hesitated at the door, then finally pushed it open. Inside, she found Thomas Grant sitting at a grand piano, reading notes from a sheet. He looked up and smiled warmly when he saw her. "Emily, I'm glad you came," he said, standing to shake her hand. "I was afraid last night might have been too overwhelming." She laughed nervously. "It feels like a dream," she admitted, "a good one. Though," Thomas gestured toward the piano. "Why don't you show me what you can do when the lights aren't blinding you?" he said. Emily nodded slowly and sat down. Her heart raced as she placed her hands on the keys. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The melody that flowed out was softer than before, but full of soul. Each note carried a piece of her truth, a story of years lost and hope regained. Thomas listened silently, his head tilted slightly, his fingers tapping lightly on the piano lid in rhythm. When she finished, the room was quiet. Thomas finally spoke. "You play like someone who's lived through everything she's playing," he said. "That's rare, Emily. That's what people connect to, honesty. Feeling raw truth." She looked up, unsure what to say. "I've made mistakes," she said softly. "I gave up once. I don't want to do that again," Thomas smiled. "Then don't," he said simply. "Let's make sure the world hears you this time." Emily felt her throat tighten. Her eyes filling with tears, she nodded, unable to speak. Thomas handed her a small notebook. "We'll start with a demo," he said. "You'll need to practice, record, refine, but you've got what matters most. A heart that plays before the fingers do." She took the notebook, her heart swelling for the first time. Her dream didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt real, breathing, alive. When she left the studio that afternoon, the city looked different, brighter. Every sound, every face, every heartbeat around her seemed like part of a song she was finally ready to play. She walked past the restaurant where she used to serve tables, the one where everything began and smiled. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but that no longer scared her because this time, she wasn't waiting for permission to chase her dream. She had found her turning point. And as she disappeared into the crowd, the sound of her own music seemed to follow her, a melody full of promise, courage, and the quiet magic of second chances. The weeks that followed felt like a dream Emily never wanted to wake from. Each morning she woke up before the sun, her heart filled with purpose. Her small apartment, once silent and cold, now echoed with the sound of music. The piano she had saved up for years ago but never had the courage to play now became her closest friend again. Every day after her shift at the restaurant, she would rush to Thomas Grant's studio. He taught her how to control her tone, how to feel every note before playing it, but most of all, he reminded her that music wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. Your sound, he told her one evening, isn't polished yet, but it's real, and that's what makes people listen. Emily practiced for hours. Sometimes her fingers hurt. Sometimes the songs didn't sound right. But she never stopped. Each mistake only made her stronger, more determined, more alive. She was no longer the quiet waitress who blended into the background. She was becoming who she was always meant to be. Word about her spread quickly. People began to talk about the mysterious pianist who had stunned an entire restaurant. Videos recorded by guests that night were shared online. Within days, her performance had gone viral. Thousands of people watched her play, commenting on the raw emotion in her music. "She makes me feel something," one wrote. "Her hands speak when words fail," said another. Emily was overwhelmed. She had never imagined the world would know her name. Yet everywhere she looked, there it was. Emily Ross, the waitress who played her way into people's hearts. Thomas smiled one morning as he showed her the numbers on his tablet. "You see this?" He said, 500,000 views in just 1 week. "You're not invisible anymore, Emily." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't care about being famous," she said softly. "I just want people to feel what I feel when I play." Thomas nodded. "And that," he said, "is exactly why they will." A few weeks later, she recorded her first single. The song was called One More Chance, a soft, emotional piece that told her story through every note. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have drums or special effects. Just Emily and her piano. When the final track was finished, Thomas looked at her and said, "This song isn't just music. It's a heartbeat." When the song was released, it spread like wildfire. Radio stations began playing it. Streaming platforms featured it on their homepages. People from around the world wrote messages saying how the song made them cry, how it gave them hope, how it reminded them of their own dreams they had left behind. One evening, Emily stood in front of her old restaurant, the same one where everything began, through the glass. She saw new waiters serving tables, laughter floating through the air, and the piano still sitting proudly in the corner. She smiled, remembering the night she took that first step toward it. The night that changed her life. She walked in quietly, and the staff recognized her instantly. "Emily," Sarah cried, running to hug her. "You're on the radio. Everyone's been talking about you." Mr. Clark appeared behind the counter, grinning from ear to ear. "Our star has returned," he said. "We tell every guest the story, how our own waitress once played that piano and stunned the whole city." Emily laughed softly, tears sparkling in her eyes. "I'll never forget this place," she said. "It's where everything started." She walked over to the piano and touched its surface. "Thank you," she whispered, almost as if speaking to an old friend. That night she performed again, not for fame or cameras, but for the people who believed in her first. The restaurant fell silent as she began to play One More Chance. The melody floated through the room, warm and familiar. When she finished, the applause was full of love, not surprise. Everyone already knew who she was now, but the magic of her music was still the same. Later that year, Emily stood backstage at a grand concert hall, her first official performance as a signed artist. The stage lights glowed through the curtains. The crowd murmured with excitement. She peeked out and saw hundreds of faces waiting. Some she knew, most she didn't, but all there because her music had touched them. Thomas stood beside her, smiling. "You ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling just like that first night. "I think so," she said, "but I'm not nervous anymore. I'm grateful." He patted her shoulder. "Then go give them what you gave that restaurant," he said. "Give them your heart." When Emily walked onto the stage, The applause was thunderous. Lights shone on her as she sat at the grand piano. Her heart pounded, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was joy. She pressed the first key, and the hall filled with the familiar, gentle sound that had once silenced a crowd of strangers. As she played, she smiled, remembering every step that brought her here, the long nights, the tired shifts, the broken dreams, and the moment she chose to believe again. Each note carried gratitude, strength, and love. Her music wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a promise to herself, to never stop playing, never stop feeling, never stop dreaming. When the final note echoed through the hall, the audience rose to their feet. Cheering, clapping, crying, Emily bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had come full circle, from a forgotten waitress to a woman whose music healed hearts, including her own, and somewhere in that cheering crowd, a young girl watched her with shining eyes, holding her mother's hand, whispering, "Mama, I want to play the piano one day." Her mother smiled. "Then play, sweetheart. Maybe one day your music will change the world too." Emily smiled through her tears, the lights shimmering around her like stars, because in that moment, she knew her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who ever had a dream, lost it, and dared to find it again. Her music had become more than sound. It had become hope. And as she played her final encore, every note whispered the same message to the world. Never stop believing, even when no one's watching. Because sometimes all it takes is one song, one moment, one brave step toward the piano to begin again,